Welcome to Convicted Hearts. I am Jen, your host, and today I have the honor of being here with Marcy. How are you today, Marcy?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
You did, I believe, a decade prison time in the state of Texas. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. And I'm glad that you caught me on YouTube. That's kind of a newer channel for me. And I'm like you, just trying to share people's stories on there.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's start off with maybe a little bit about your early years. How did you grow up? Can you give us a little background?
Sure. I grew up in a pretty middle class family, suburban neighborhood, not very diverse. My parents are pretty hippie-ish, so I was raised to love everybody, to treat people with respect, regardless of race, nationality, sexuality, monetary value that they might have, or how much money their family made. And even with all of that, I was really raised in a very white neighborhood. so yeah, I didn't, I was raised to know right from wrong.
Mhm.
I grew up privileged in the way that obviously I'm white, and then also I never went to bed hungry. So we didn't have a lot. We didn't have everything that I ever wanted, but we definitely had everything we needed. I always had a roof over my head. My parents are still married. They're still very much in love to this day. So definitely I grew up with that privilege. I got pregnant at a pretty young age, and I think that I found myself wanting to prove myself to everyone as a young mother, as somebody that could make it on their own. Um, I think that that kind of mindset kind of led me into later on committing a crime that landed me in prison.
Yeah, I could see how that could possibly take someone down that route. I'm a teen mom myself, so I can relate to being a young mom and all of that. It's definitely an added stress in life, but a blessing at the same time. I like to hear a little bit about how people grew up because it kind of helps give an insight to the entire picture when you're telling it. Around what age did you find yourself sort of getting into the situation that led up to you doing time in prison?
So if you fast forward to my late 20s, I have um, two small babies and three children in middle school. I'm re- remarried, divorced, and remarried. My first husband was very financially successful, especially for our age.
Mm.
I was not very emotionally stable at that time in my life. I felt like I had failed in my marriage. I was not that happy in my current situation. Um, and I was working. I was a full time mom. I was working, changing diapers, working full time, um, baseball games, cheerleading practices, going to work. And that was pretty much my life. My intention was never set out to how can I get free money or how can I get over on someone. I don't think it very often starts out that way.
Right.
So often there's circumstances, right? And so my circumstances happened to be I worked for this manufacturing plant, and my bosses were entrepreneurs, and so they would buy up businesses and undersell their competitor and kind of force their competitor to buy them out. So that was how they made their money. And I'm not dodging on that. You know, that's one way. It's how it works,
I
right?
hear
But
you.
but in doing that, they were then kind of doing some shenanigans with their books to make it look like they were more successful than they were.
Mhm.
And it was kind of a smaller operation, and I was actively participating in that. Through that, I kind of saw how much money they were potentially going to make off of this deal, how little I was getting paid.
Mhm.
I felt underappreciated and frankly, I kind of lost respect for my employers.
Hmm.
By no means, Jen, is that a reason like a green light to go off and take all this money that doesn't belong to you. But that's kind of just some of the things that were going on in my inner self.
Right.
So that when the opportunity presented itself,
Hmm.
it was easier for me to make an immoral choice because I had kind of all of those things
Sure.
inside of me. Also, just that I think my first husband being so financially successful played into that.
Mhm.
I didn't really realize that until kind of recently, but I think that just wanting to keep up with the Joneses, that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I can see how that would definitely sort of, it all plays into, right? It all plays into it. Like all of your state of mind, wanting to keep up with the Joneses. Like, was there other people in your place of employment that knew what was going on, or was it just yourself?
Yeah, Jen, nobody knew. And nobody at my workplace knew. My husband at the time didn't know. My family absolutely didn't know. Nobody in my environment would have been approving of that in any form or fashion. I absolutely kept it a secret, which just kind of any mental health problems I had, or maybe depression with the divorce and this kind of thing, was
Mhm.
just definitely exacerbated by um, me committing my crime, because my crime didn't happen. It wasn't just one transaction, it was several transactions over a couple of years. And
Mhm.
so during that time, I'm watching my kids grow. I'm having to, I'm lying to them
Mhm.
about where the money's coming from. I'm lying to my parents, to my husband at the time. And you kind of have to, in order to keep that up, you disassociate. So I was there, but I wasn't all the way present
Yeah.
and emotionally available for my family at that time.
Mhm.
I was digging myself into a hole. I knew it wasn't going to end well. And in a way, I was pushing people away.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you start to feel, Marcy, like it was sort of the walls were closing in? Were you feeling any sort of paranoia at all? Or you said you felt like it wasn't going to end well. I'm just trying to figure out, where your mind was at.
So, for sure, there was a constant sense of anxiety
Mhm.
behind that, knowing that you're doing something illegal, knowing that the punishment for that can be prison.
Mhm.
Um, and in the same breath, not really, I didn't really have the tools available to me to stop what I was doing, because
Mhm.
that those transactions and getting that money like that, it very much became an addiction for me.
Yeah.
And so I would stop for a little while and kind of tie up all the loose ends, where really, if I had just left it alone, maybe
Mhm.
I would have never been caught. I don't know. But it would just call to me and I would pick it up, and not because some dire situation, like some medical concern, my grandma had cancer, or, not some huge financial need, but
Mhm.
just that need to feel that rush. So
Right.
it was ridiculous. I remember very clearly, in the middle of all of this, I had two babies,
Mhm.
and I remember consciously trying to soak in as much of them as I could get at that moment, because I knew my actions were taking me to a place that I very well could not be around them.
Mhm.
It was a horrible existence. There was no peace in my spirit during that time. It was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not like you were just able to enjoy what was going on around you. Truly, it's sort of that looming cloud over your head, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I'm messing up any kind of bonds that I have with the people that I absolutely love the most and that I care about the most, because I have this huge secret that I'm keeping from them and I can't let them in on it.
Right.
And I mean, it's not one lie, it's lie after lie after lie.
Right. Yeah, that had to be difficult. How do you feel, or if leading up to it being discovered, what do you feel happened? Did it just become obvious to your employers, or what unfolded?
So I actually, the way that I was taking money, I was using it was called kiting. It's called kiting money. And so I was opening business accounts under false tax ID numbers, basically businesses that had closed. I was using their tax ID numbers. I was using those accounts, and you have to move money back and forth. And at that time, now this was years ago, so before somebody's out there like taking notes so they
Right.
can try it at home, trust me, first of all, you don't want to do it. And second of all, this was now 13, 14 years ago. So security was a little bit different. But back then, Bank of America had a business account. If you opened your business account, that it would float your first payment. Like they wanted your business, they wanted you to open your account so you could kind of get away with moving money that way. The
Mm.
thing is, if it stopped, if the money sat still and was stagnant, it would throw up a red flag and it would cause an actual person to go in and look at the accounts. So I had to keep the money moving and
Mhm.
flowing back and forth, back and forth. And I lived about 45 minutes from work. I lived out in the middle of nowhere. We still had dial up at that time, dial up internet.
Yeah.
And there was this big ice storm and it knocked our internet out. I couldn't get online to move the money.
Mhm.
And I was panicked. I was panicked. My husband at the time did not know anything about what was going on.
Mhm.
And I remember like telling him, hey, I'm just going to put the truck in 4-wheel drive and crawl in. I need to get to the office. And um, I mean, schools, everything was closed. And he said, Marcy, Texas is closed. It's an
Yeah.
ice storm, and Texas does not know how to drive in the ice. They shut the state down when it happens. And that's what kind of situation I was in. And that money not being able to get moved that day is what flew that red flag up. So,
About how long after that until I guess you were approached?
uh, so that happened on a Friday, the ice
Mhm.
storm, and I couldn't get into work and I couldn't move anything. And later that evening, my boss called and said, hey, Monday morning the big bosses are going to be in, we're going to have a meeting. And I just felt it with every fiber of my body. I knew that meeting was about me, and I knew it was about these transactions and what had been going on. So Monday morning I went into work, and my big boss, I walked into my office and he was sitting in my office at my desk in my chair with documents out in front of him. And they were print offs from the bank of transactions. And he just said, what is this? So I, it's going to sound so crazy because, yes, there was definitely still dread and fear
Mhm.
from knowing consequences are going to come with this. But in that same breath, in that same moment, there was also just a huge relief
Yeah.
that it's done. Like it's no more. I don't have to lie anymore. I'm not trying to hide anything anymore. And it's just what it is. And let's get it over with. And um, at Jen, I do not advise anyone, whether they're guilty or not, to talk
Right.
about their crime or accused crime without an
Mhm.
attorney. I still, to this day, believe I would have gotten a much better deal had I had an attorney present. But it just that
Mhm.
feeling of relief, I just said,
Mhm.
yeah, I've been doing this. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can say. This is what I saw you guys doing this. And
Mhm.
I took it a step further, and what can I say?
Yeah.
Moments later, two detectives walked in the room, and I went with them. And again, I was naive. It felt good to talk. I was glad it was over, but I still wish
Yeah.
I had not gone in that room with those detectives and I laid their case out for them. And I would have never tried to plead innocent. I was not trying to say I was innocent, but I still should have waited for an attorney. I recommend to everyone to wait for their attorney.
Yeah, definitely. I can see how it would, there would be a sense of relief, because keeping that up as long as you were able to, and it would, I could imagine, I try to put myself in that situation. It would feel like, okay, let's just let's just face it, get it over with. But like you said, it would have been great to have an attorney present, ideally. It sounds like it all just unfolded right there in that one day.
It did that, sitting in that typical little room like you might see on Law and Order or whatever, when they've got the suspect in
Yeah.
the interrogation room. That's how it
Mhm.
looked. And they left me sitting there for a moment, walked out, and came back and said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." Like, they literally left that office, made a phone call to the
Mhm.
district attorney's office and said, really walked out and said,
Mhm.
"We have her. She's admitted to it." And they came back and said, we're going to charge you with theft over $100,000.
Mhm.
And um, I was in handcuffs right then. I called my husband at the time,
Mhm.
and I'm sure that they thought he knew all about it. I'm
Yeah.
looking back, that he was very anxious for me to allow me to use the phone, and he even left me in his office alone to use the phone. But
Mhm.
I'm quite sure that was recorded,
Sure.
and I'm quite sure they were expecting to hear something from him. But he just, bless his heart, he didn't have a clue. He thought that I must be, when I told him I had gotten arrested, he thought it must be for a traffic violation. So
Okay. For you to make that phone call, what was going through your mind in that moment?
I'm trying to think about how that felt. I remember I was just so concerned about where my kids would be and what would happen with them. And I didn't know at that time, you get arrested and you go to county jail and they set a
Mhm.
bond. In my mind, I'm still not thinking that it's a long term. So I'm still very much thinking in the short term, like, okay, we need childcare for the next couple days. And okay, are my older kids at their dad's, or what's going on with them? So I remember it being like, I'm
Mhm.
still very much in mom mode, making
Yeah.
the plans in my mind and trying to figure that out. And so um, I did go to county jail, and they did set my bond for $100,000.
Mhm.
It cost $10,000 to get me out with the bondsman,
Right.
and my husband and my grandmother paid that bond for me. They split it, and I
Mhm.
came home, and I had a lot of explaining to do. I
Yeah.
remember still thinking that I could have possibly gotten probation, but I might not be looking at prison. And in fact, in the county jail, all those ladies are like, "Girl, you've never been in trouble. You're probably going to get probation. You're probably going to have to pay that money back, girl." And so
Mhm.
that's in my mind, kind of what I'm thinking. But my kids knew, I they knew that I had been arrested. They knew. And I just remember trying to spend like as much time as I could with them at that time. I remember we went to the rodeo, and I just remember trying to take way more pictures than I probably would. And there
Yeah.
was this sense of um, knowing that I just might not be there, but I didn't really know.
Yeah.
And then within 2 weeks, they finished the audit and they changed my charge to theft over 200,000, and that caused me to have a new bond, and we
Mm.
just couldn't afford for me to get out again. So I ended up in county jail and stayed in county jail. So
Okay. How long were you in county jail while did you go to trial? How did that work?
So I didn't go all the way to trial. And Jen, only about 3% of cases actually go to trial. About 97% of cases end in a plea deal because people are scared to go to trial. They threaten you with a lot. So my charge was theft over $200,000. That was a first-degree felony, and it carried a sentence between 5 and 99 years. So the way it worked is I go to court, and my lawyer had talked to the DA, and he comes back and says, "Hey, they made an offer for a plea deal, and my first offer was 40 years." And I did not sign for that. But that was the moment that I was like, well, they're not playing with me.
That
I'm not.
was a wake-up call moment. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So I remember going back from that court date into the county jail, and the ladies there that I had been with now for about 30 or 45 days, they're asking me, what happened? What happened? And I just remember I was just in shock, and I went and got in my bunk and just put my blanket over my head. I just couldn't hardly breathe, and I was under the covers, and the more it was just like this heaviness, like, holy heck, this is real, this is happening, and it's happening now. And my chest just felt like I was having a heart attack, and it turns out that was my first ever panic attack, and they had to call medical. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to die right here before I even go, before anything else happens. I thought I was going to die. It just was that kind of very physical reaction.
Were the ladies that were around you trying to be encouraging or helpful, or did they realize in that moment as well, like you were facing something very serious?
It was kind of a tricky situation for me while I was in county jail, because I did have a first-degree felony. I was definitely looking at prison time, but because it was a white-collar crime, I was in a tank full of women there, like with traffic tickets, sitting out their traffic ticket time, women doing maybe 6 months of county time, and I'm going to prison. Like it was very real for me. So I didn't have anybody to kind of talk to, or I wasn't in the same boat as anybody. So they kind of walked on eggshells around me. And I ended up being in county for about 8 months. And by the time I left that county, I was very well respected in that pod. It was just, I was going somewhere, and those ladies were just passing through, and I was there for the long run. So.
Right. Oh, wow. So you end up eventually reaching a plea agreement. Is that right?
Yes. The final plea agreement after 8 months of negotiating was 20 years. And I signed for that 20-year sentence. When it came down to it, they started making threatening to arrest my husband, to charge him as well. And even though I felt confident he didn't know, he would not have approved of any of that. And he absolutely didn't know. I just could not see him putting him through that. Like, I couldn't see having him arrested, and then the kids. And then, I mean, I just gave in. I just honestly just gave in at that last 20. My attorney actually pulled open his laptop, and he pulled up something online, and it was the Texas parole board review date. Like, it was a chart. So it said, at 20 years, you see parole at 28 months. And I'm like working through the numbers in my head, and I've got these 3 middle school kids, and okay, I won't miss their high school graduation. I won't miss prom for my daughter. I won't miss kindergarten for my younger daughters. And I could wrap my mind around all of that. So I signed that paper for 20 years that day. And my family wasn't at the court date. So I was just there by myself, and I go back to the county, and I call, and I talk to my dad, and he was just so heartbroken. Like, we just didn't really expect that amount of time. And even though they say parole at 28 months, they don't know. That's not how it worked. You know, I didn't go home in 28 months. I didn't go home in 3 years. I didn't go home in 5 years. You know, 10 years later, I made parole.
Wow. That would be a tough phone call with your dad. And oh, my heart just goes out to you and your family. But it's it puts it's a reality. You know, a lot of people may see this and think, you know what? Yeah, that's something that I don't want to go through, and may stop them from doing something they were tempted to do. Who knows? Like your story, your testimony can obviously is touching a lot of people already. So I appreciate you sharing
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I hope that when people look at my whole story, first of all, that they realize good people can make bad decisions,
Yes.
and that happens.
Oh yeah.
Lots of good people make bad decisions,
Hmm.
and then also that we don't have to find our worth in material things.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a lot where my head used to be, like
Hmm.
pre-prison Marcy used to put her value and a lot in how successful people thought she was. And
Hmm.
all of that is just so irrelevant. You know, my kids did not need to get to go to the county fair with $100 in their pocket each. They didn't need that. What they needed was me home. You know, what they needed is a mom that was completely emotionally and mentally present and not so wrapped up in this other thing. So,
Yes. Yeah, definitely. When you go into the first prison you're sent to, what is the name of that prison?
so I went to Dayton, Texas at Plain State Jail.
Okay.
And when you pull, it's called pulling chain when they transfer you from one facility to another. So
Hmm.
I'm on chain from the county jail, and I remember kind of in a daze because I had gotten comfortable where I was in
Hmm.
the county jail. Like I said, I was really well respected by the ladies in there. I helped ladies. A lot of ladies would come in detoxing, and I was kind of a little bit of a motherly figure in there and was able to help a lot of young people. And I was scared, you know, I didn't want to leave. So it was like 5 in the morning, and I was leaving, and one of the officers that had been there with me the whole time, we went in the vestibule where there's no cameras. So you leave the pod and you're kind of like in this little room where they have to lock you in the room and then unlock the other door as a safety measure. And I think it's called a Sally port.
Yeah.
There's no cameras in there. And she just hugged me. And I remember her telling me, like, this is just the next step to get home. Like, it's, you know, to take it easy. And I remember walking out and I was kind of in a daze because it just feels very surreal. Like I'm
Yeah.
in these quite literal black and white striped clothes.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I remember holding a chain bag of stuff, and I'm just thinking, is this happening? This
Yeah.
is my life? And there was a male inmate that was outside cleaning. He was like doing janitorial work. And he was like, don't worry, Ma, it's just the next step home. And I just remember everybody trying to offer me encouragement. And I was walking into hell. I'm just going to
Wow.
tell you that
Yeah.
it was no joke when I got to my destination in Dayton, Texas. It was brutal.
Really.
It was no joke there.
Wow. Is it that specific facility, or just being incarcerated in Texas, period? What is your what do you mean by it was hell? What's
So when I said that, I'm definitely thinking about the first day, and that
mm,
particular facility for women in Texas. There are two units that are intake units, and the one in Dayton is known for very harsh welcome to prison type situation. We can go through that if you want. I
yeah.
can kind of talk about. So we get there, and I'm from this small county, and
Mhm.
I arrive, and I'm walking. I'm handcuffed as I'm walked in. I'm walked into this open room that similar to a warehouse, and it has chain link cages lining the one wall, kind of in an L shape, with people that had arrived before me. So ladies are there in those cages. A lot of ladies are in those cages. And since I'm from a small county, I didn't pull chain with anyone else. I'm by myself, and I go in, and two ladies, officers, aggressively, definitely with the intention of intimidating all of us, had me to strip out. It was a very invasive strip search. It was like, lean back, spread your vagina open, with one of the officers peering down with a flashlight inside of me. It was very invasive. It was not just like a regular strip search like you might think. And I'm right there in the middle of the room. So all the women that are in cages can see me. There were no male officers present, but it was just a special type of humiliation. And then the officers' attitudes and aggression in that department of that prison, and they're still doing it now, it just adds to that, right? And then you walk naked to the showers. You walk all the way through completely naked from where you stripped and had to take all your clothes off, and you go to the showers, and it's an open shower, and delouse powder stuff is thrown on your hair, and you're handed this tiny little green bar of soap, and you have to wash in front of the officer and whomever else cares to look. It was
that sounds pretty traumatizing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Just out on display in front of everybody, and to be spoken to in such an aggressive manner when you're already in your most vulnerable state. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was a lot. It really was a lot. So once I got to my pod, those ladies were wonderful. I came across so many beautifully hearted and beautifully spirited women during my incarceration. And so I kind of grew up in this little white suburban bubble, right? And even though I was taught about different cultures, I was not exposed to them. And so now all of a sudden I'm submerged in this very diverse environment, and I'm meeting people from all different walks of life that grew up so differently than me. And it started changing my view on things. I think that prior to my incarceration, I just was probably one of those people that were like, don't do the crime if you can't do the time, honestly, because I honestly thought, I had this belief in our criminal justice system that the people that were incarcerated needed to be incarcerated. And then I met all these incredible people, and that grew up with childhood trauma and grew up with just horrible things, parents with substance abuse disorders, mental health illnesses, women that had been incarcerated at 11, 12, 13 years old, like just all of these huge stories. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, just a minute. These women were broken way before they ever committed a crime that landed them in prison, and I always say, like, I was kind of the exception to the rule. I was definitely went in with privilege. I definitely went in with wonderful family support. I definitely went in with, the worst childhood trauma. I can't even think of a bad story. That's honestly, so I just, my eyes started opening, and with me hearing stories and relaying to them, to my family, their eyes and hearts started opening. And I remember thinking, man, everybody needs to know how wonderful these people are in here, and how none of them were in there like, man, I'm so glad I was out there on the streets doing what I was doing. Man, I'm so glad I was knee deep in methamphetamines and selling my body and robbing people for my addiction. Nobody was doing that. They were in there full of guilt and shame, and then also hope that they wouldn't have to go back to that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking when you said that, I appreciate your honesty in saying, you really did come from a great family. And it just goes to show, like, you never know. I always like to think of it like this. We're all one bad decision away from, possibly getting caught up in something. It can happen to anybody. And I've heard a lot about how the ladies are, that I've spoken with, and you can tell me firsthand. It's almost like I hear it's sort of like a prison family. I hear it referred to as, when you're in there, you have like a core group of people that normally come together and support each other. Is that how you felt?
Absolutely. Very much it's like that. I'm really happy to say that women's prison in Texas are not segregated by race. They're
Yeah.
not segregated by what you did in the free world.
Mhm.
It's just, there are kind of cliques, and it's just like if you were to meet friends at your employment, at your job or your workplace, and you would just, whomever you have were like-minded with and got along with. And those, you can imagine how close, if you and your best friend slept next together, ate every meal together,
Mhm.
worked together. I mean, we are there with each other 24/7. And so
Mhm.
those bonds get very strong. And women do form play families.
Mhm.
Men get affiliated and they form gangs.
Mhm.
Women, we form play families.
Right.
I had a play mom in there. I was called mom by
Mhm.
several young ladies. Two of them are home, and I'm in
Oh,
contact with them still, that call me mom. And I tell my kids, my prison daughter, my prison
yeah.
daughter this, and that it's very much siblings, and we very much click up like that
Mhm.
and make our own family structure in there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. Like, it's definitely a way to survive and make it through um, your time there, I'm sure. And as far as any sort of like altercations or fights or things like that, is it true that most of those things only happen pretty much when it involves a relationship, or is that, am I on the right track there?
Very much so, Jen. I would say, I mean, 90, high 90 percentage of any kind of violence that happened in
Mhm.
prison. I was on a maximum security unit, and it happened behind relationships. It was domestic violence. Women are emotional creatures, and it would happen from either very close friends or girlfriends.
Right. As far as like visiting and things like that, how did that work out for you? Did your husband at the time bring the kids to come see you, or how did that work?
So I was so fortunate and again privileged that my family, one, had the means. They had a vehicle, they had money for gas, and the willingness to come see me, because oftentimes I was hours away. In fact, my oldest daughter, we were headed somewhere, and I said, "Oh, I'm driving, da da da." And she said, "Yeah, mom, I remember that's how we felt when we used to have to come see you." And I just remember
You're
that
like,
put
"Oh."
in perspective, right? Because they would
Yeah.
have to get up early in the morning,
Mhm.
get in the car for several hours, wait in line,
Yeah.
sometimes outside in the hot sun, and then for a 2-hour visit, and so
Mhm.
I did. I was very fortunate. My husband at the time, he brought my daughters, he brought them at least once a month to see me during my incarceration. He had the phone set up so that I could talk to them.
Mhm.
Um, my family brought my older kids. They got to come, and at one point, my kids got old enough to come on their own. When you turn 18, you can drive down there, and um, so, yeah, I was very blessed for that. I was able to I have so many, like, if I could go back and do it again, obviously I wouldn't go to prison. Obviously, I
Yeah,
would start like before I committed the crime, right?
yeah,
But if I had to go to prison, if I wish that I had handled things with my kids a little bit different. I
mhm,
think that I had this idea that the people in the free world were keeping them in the loop as to what was happening regarding my sentencing,
mhm,
regarding my parole. And I didn't really know that they were just kind of told I was in prison. And I wish that I
mhm.
had been more like, this is what's going on, because they were old enough to understand it, my older kids. So I definitely regret that. And then the other thing I kind of regret is I changed roles. I completely kind of stepped back from the mom who offers guidance
Mhm.
role. I became the mom who visited and was your friend and maybe a sounding board, yes,
Yeah,
but I wasn't really mom anymore. You know, I was still mom, but I had just not kept that role, and I wish I had kind of kept that. It would have made things, I think, especially on my younger daughters, a little bit easier.
yeah,
You know, they knew me as mom, but they didn't know me as the mom that had any kind of authority or could offer them guidance. And so
yeah.
that's kind of a struggle now.
Yeah, I'm sure that would be very difficult. And I mean, just finding that balance, how do you parent from prison? I'm sure that was a hard one.
Yeah, it was tricky. But I think that I could have had more discussions about discipline and
Mhm.
about how things are going at school. Even though I couldn't like actively say you're grounded, but I think that their dad and I could have collaborated on that
Mhm.
more. And instead, I just kind of stepped back from that role. Uh, yeah. So.
Throughout the duration of the time that you served, were you at just that one facility or were you ever sent to another prison?
So that intake unit in Dayton, you don't stay there for more than 2 years. And I ended up staying about 8 months there also. And then I got transferred to big girl prison. And
Oh,
it was the same kind of fear and anxiety. Change is just not easy for anybody, but also I had been there and uh, had my comfort zone. I had the people that I cooked with. I had my bunkie that was like my play sister, and then I'm going to this big girl prison, and it was a maximum security unit, I found out. And so I was nervous about that because I
mhm.
didn't really know what to expect. At the intake unit, anybody with a major crime, they don't stay there because it's not like double fenced. It doesn't have the security
Wow.
measures for like a murder charge or a bigger
Mhm.
charge like that. So I was like, man, I don't know how these women are going to be.
Yeah.
And again, just when I got there, my fears easily subsided because the women of all different charges, of all different sentence lengths,
Mhm.
were welcoming and helpful. And like anywhere where there's a lot of people, I'm not going to sit here and say everyone was so wonderful. You
Yeah.
know, there's always some bad apples in the mix that are trying to cause problems or trying to manipulate situations. But for the most part, I just met some of the most amazing people there.
Were you ever in fear of somebody like, harassing you, taking advantage of you? Is that something, since you were going in with a white collar crime, do you feel like you were looked at maybe differently?
You know what, Jen? There was never a time that I was afraid of someone else that I was incarcerated with. There was never a time that I felt like anytime I did I did go to commissary, and there were women that didn't go to commissary, and anytime that I helped someone, it would have just be the same way if I helped someone out here. I never felt like I was really getting used or manipulated, and I definitely wasn't afraid of any kind of physical violence. I was afraid of officers, Jen. It was um, and again, it's not all officers because there are some wonderful people that work in corrections, and
Mhm.
people that are there just trying to do their job and do what they can, right, to feed their family and pay their bills. But then there are some that have a lot of malice inside of them, and uh, those are the ones that are scary because they have such a control over your
Mhm.
actual freedom when it comes down
Yeah.
to it. And when you're incarcerated, your word means zero, and a correctional officer's word means everything. So
Yeah.
the fear came from staff. It did not come from people that I was incarcerated with.
Mhm. I've heard this from several ladies, and I would imagine um, the person that, holds the keys to your freedom basically is who you have the most fear for. Did you ever witness any, I don't know, I guess inappropriate relationships between officers and some of the women there?
Sure, sure, I did. That happens. Absolutely, it happens. It just like any other any
Yeah,
TV show or prison movie you've seen. It
right.
goes down just like that. It's very sneaky. It's passing notes back and forth. It's some inmates will hold eyes for an officer for
Mhm.
them to do their thing, like in the officers' bathrooms where that goes down a lot. Absolutely, that happens. I it's such an imbalance of power for
Mhm.
me. That would never work. I have to be in control of things,
Yes.
and that I could have never. It would have never worked for me.
Mhm.
Um, I'm so legally, legally, if a correctional officer has sex with someone that's incarcerated, that's
Mhm.
rape because legally the law says, federal law
Yeah.
says, no, that person who's incarcerated does not have the capability to say yes or no. And so I go back and forth on this,
Mhm.
and the reason I go back and forth on this, I do agree it's wrong. And I also agree that people that are incarcerated, and women is what I know about. I can't speak on how men's works, but we are so lonely and we feel forgotten in there.
Mhm.
And especially for women that are used to getting attention from men on the outside and now they're inside around only women, when they get that little bit of attention, it feels different in there than it does out here. So I can see
Mhm.
how why that law is. It makes sense, right? And it could just go so very badly, and I have seen it go badly. I have very much seen an officer and an inmate having an inappropriate relationship, and it happened to be two females, a female officer and a female inmate, and the inmate makes the officer mad in some way regarding their relationship, and now it's on. That officer is going to cross that lady out, which means she's going to get them in trouble. She's going to get them moved
Yeah.
and cased up, which disciplinary cases, and those disciplinary cases, man, they keep you from making phone calls home. They keep you from going outside and getting fresh air. They can keep you, if it's a major one, they can keep you from making parole. It's serious stuff. It's a scary situation when that happens.
Yeah. So that can really alter, your life if you got crossed up with the wrong officer. Obviously, that's scary. Yeah.
Absolutely. And even though it is, there are laws to protect incarcerated people from that
Mhm.
very scenario. If you get caught, so say if I was in a relationship with an officer and I'm writing them and I'm actively pursuing them back, you get disciplinary cases for that as well. So it's like it's just
Yeah,
don't
it's
do it.
crazy.
Don't do it. Don't go to
Right.
prison first of all. And if
Yeah,
you do have to for some reason, don't get involved with an officer.
for sure. I had a question. I've always wondered because I know how it's handled more so in men's prisons, but how do the women handle, let's say, a case that a female's going in, maybe high profile, that has done something terrible or harmed her own child or a child, are they looked at in a way of like, they're going to get got, or is it different in the ladies' prison?
Jen, I think that based on comments on my social media, I think it's different, depends on what prison you're in, and not necessarily even male or female. But as far as female inmates in Texas, I was there with a lot of high profile cases. I was with ladies that came off of death row. I was with ladies that very much had horrific crimes against their children. And those ladies were not in any kind of physical danger. What might happen is not as many people mess with them. Like you would say, a prison lingo would be like, oh, I don't fuck with her.
Yeah.
And that's what it's, so they would kind of not be included in as much, but they were absolutely, their safety was, from what I could see, and I never heard of anything, and I never saw anything. And we were there with some pretty ugly crimes. One of the old schools that is my close friend now, she did 30 years, and she talks about they starved out a lady because a lady was there for starving her child. And she talks about in the early 90s, the lady came in, and it was just like you're talking about, a fairly high profile case, and they starved her out. The kitchen didn't feed her. They weren't letting her go to store. On store day, you have to get on the list and go, and they weren't letting her out the door to go, and they made sure she stayed hungry. But by the time I got there in 2010, that wasn't happening.
Okay. Yeah. There is something I saw you mention it in one of your videos, that in Texas, there is like, you guys are made to work outside in the fields, right? Wow.
Yes.
Tell me
Yeah,
about
it's Texas and most of the southern states have a field squad or a hoe squad, HOE, hoe squad. And it is very much plantation work, exactly like any old movie that you've seen, slaves working in a plantation. That's what you're seeing in the prison system. We're out there working in the fields. There's a guard who's on horseback and armed, and he's giving the orders. It's very harsh. It's very hard physical labor. Anything from, some prisons are picking cotton, some are picking potatoes, corn, cabbage, pulling weeds, and it's a lot. Yeah, it's real serious.
Yeah, and in the Texas heat, I can imagine that's just even more difficult. Wow. How did you come about getting your parole date? Like, how did you go before parole so many times before this happened for you? Or tell me a bit about how that happened.
So in Texas, inmates don't actually go in front of the parole board. It's just a file. So the file goes in front of 3 board members, and there's, I think, 5 or 6 different regions, so different voting boards. And they look at your file and they decide. So what happened is they looked at my file and decided, I think that they decided I had enough time under my belt, and they granted me parole. They granted me parole with some stipulations. I had to do an in-prison program for 6 months, and then a halfway house, and then lots of aftercare classes. So it wasn't just like, hey, you made parole, you go home next week. It was like, hey, you made parole, and a year later, you're going to go home.
Okay. So you had to jump through some hoops, in order to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. It was exciting and also like frustrating, because you have to pull chain to your program. So I remember waiting every night, like, I've made parole. Now I have to do this program before I go home, but they're not putting me on the bus to go to the program, and it took months to pull chain for that. And I remember every night, the way our prison did that is after bed book count at 10 o'clock, they did a count, and then they turned the lights off, and the officer would come in with the chain list, and she would tell who to pack up, who was going to be leaving that next morning. And so every night, here I am, just like, is it me? Is it me? Is it time?
Yeah.
And, just watch the guard walk on by my bunk, and I'm like, well, forget it. So, yeah.
Coming home, had things changed in your family unit? What did it look like, what you were coming home to?
So when I went to prison, I left my marital home, and I was not coming home to that. So that was definitely different. But I came home to my grandmother's house that was built when I was a kid. And so that was very familiar to me. My parents and my brother, it just seemed like nothing kind of missed. Like, it really didn't skip a beat. It felt very comfortable and familiar and safe around them. There's just, my family, we're definitely not perfect, but there's just lots of love. And so that was just still there. That didn't go anywhere just because I messed up and just because I had been gone. My kids, the day that I came home, I was able to have all 5 of my kids here. And my 2 grandsons, I met 2 of my grandsons for the first time that day. And my oldest grandson was 5, and he had painted a rock, and he just ran to me. He ran. It was so funny because we didn't know what my grandma name was going to be yet, And so, anyways, he's just like, look what I made for you. And they ran to me and hugged me like I had seen them last weekend, and I had never met them my whole life. And they're the most awesome little dudes. And yeah, it was a really good day. So coming home to that, all the good things, right? All the excitement and the joy and happiness and hugs, all of that. But still moving forward day to day, we're starting to see, there's lots of healing that needs to be done still. And so, and it's still, I'm 2 years and a couple months out, and we're still all healing from that, especially my kids, because they got put through so much. It was very traumatic for the whole family, but especially my kids. And so I'm not going to say, hey, everything's awesome. I'm home. Everything's cool. We're great. No, what it is I'm home, and man, there's still all this love, and we definitely get to see each other. We definitely get to love on each other, but we're also healing together and working through things.
Yes. Working towards healing is so important. But where there's lots of love, I feel like, all of that healing and good stuff can take place. So that's encouraging to hear. Tell me a bit about, obviously, your YouTube channel. You have a TikTok, you have Instagram. I've been catching up on your content and loving it. Tell me about that.
Thanks so much for that. So TikTok and Instagram, it's kind of me sharing my story and answering questions in short form content, right? And that has kind of grown. I just recently started my YouTube channel, which is kind of my baby. And so you guys hit me up there. I'm Marcy Marie 114 on all platforms, Twitter, all of it, Marcy Marie 114, or you can Google me and that stuff pops up too. But
I'll have you link in the description, all of your.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. My goal with my YouTube channel is especially highlighting women who serve time and their stories. I kind of like what we did today. I'm just trying to put a face to the image that people have on a felon or somebody that has a criminal background. And I'm just like highlighting success stories, especially. So, yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I love that you are giving a space where ladies, I mean, you are sitting down with women that you know personally, that you've been incarcerated with, and giving them a space to sort of be vulnerable and, really open up. And I think that's so important.
Thanks, Jen. I hope so. I hope it offers healing to them and then also guidance for other people. I just think it could be so good all the way around.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. So, is there anything that you would like to share before we close out? Or I appreciate you
Um,
sharing your message, or, your life, journey. And I know that there's going to be a lot of great things to come, but anything else?
Well, just thank you so much for having me. And I'll go ahead and just take this opportunity to plug my advocacy groups, if you don't mind. If I'm part of 2 advocacy groups in Texas. One is called Linus, Justice Impacted Women's Alliance, and we are formed of formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated women in Texas. And the other one is the Texas Statewide Leadership Council. Both of those groups work towards making Texas better for people with criminal backgrounds, making reintegration easier, and also changing legislation to make prison not so harmful.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll have those posted and plugged in the description as well. And I, again, just want to thank you. You guys make sure you check out Marcy's channel. You have a lot of funny stuff too on your IG and stuff. I really like it. So you guys do yourself a favor and go check her out. Again, thank you for being here. And I just want to remind everyone, always keep your hearts convicted.